That right there is a t-shirt that I was given by my sister on my birthday. I like to say she's my favorite sister, to which she groans and says, "I'm your only sister." Technically speaking, biologically, she's my only sister. But that was my birthday, and she was kind enough to drop off this amazing shirt. So, let's continue to talk about culture in the church. Now, I did an introduction, and I did a list of characteristics that cultures have that can be used to compare them, describe them, contrast them. And the first one is the idea of a cultural unconscious. That is, just as you have an unconscious mind that sometimes manifests parts of your personality that you're not comfortable with or fully aware of. You might even call it your dark side, the parts of your personality that you are prone to conceal, prone to not think about, and perhaps even feel that if you do not indulge them, they don't exist. But they tend to come out when certain invisible lines are crossed. That is, you have a boundary, you haven't told anyone about it, but the minute it gets crossed, you feel strangely justified in a certain kind of strong self-protectiveness or a certain vengefulness. So, what is the cultural unconscious of some Christian churches? I believe that there is a sense of insularity, that what we were saved for is to become a separate tribal thing. And anyone, such as me, bringing up any point that might critique the practices, not the belief, but the practices of a given group of God's people, might even be in sin to do so. Now, I hope that my premise, which was we can have more effective outreach, more effective discipleship, more effective ministry, if we are conscious of these cultural things and figuring out which ones are biblical and which are just humanity, we might actually do a better job with God's resources. I know of a ministry with whom I spent a couple of years, and I don't say the name, that has received various forms of criticism about their insularity, about potential nepotism, about a putting ahead of their internal circle ahead of the needs of people around them. And the response has been criticizing the church is criticizing God's wife, and that makes God angry. The statement then becomes, you cannot ever broach the topic in any way, shape, or form about the imperfections of the church. Now, I would say that the writer of Revelation would disagree. I would say the Holy Spirit would disagree. I would say Paul in all his letters, which are painstakingly positive in order to soften the intensity of whatever critique he has about their spiritual growth, would disagree. So, that's one example right there. That accusation. See, I think it's very dangerous. We have certain things that we're allowed to do in our society right now, and you should have to defend and support your statement. That is, there's accusations that are being made within our culture right now, and the person that makes them doesn't have to defend them, doesn't have to explain or substantiate. They can say that action made me feel X, Y, or Z, and society will take it as if it's fact. And in the same fashion, a church or ministry says, well, we have been critiqued and we're going to respond by accusing you of sin. There are certain people that will go, well, you know what? That does sound right. They are a big ministry and you're a person who's not as successful. So there is, in the cultural unconscious of the Christian church, is a tribalism that makes us want to protect things that are God's and not ours to protect. And perhaps a inclination to trust those that are successful over those that aren't, meaning there's a subtle way that we've allowed the prosperity gospel into our thinking subconsciously. That is, well, I mean, if that guy's a millionaire, clearly God must have blessed him. There's no way a Christian becomes a millionaire unless, God really wanted him rich. And that's profoundly untrue, because you think about Balaam, who was a prophet, and he was being offered resources to prophesy against. So do you think it's much, much harder for a gifted man of God to realize that there's some kind of area in our world that would love to hire a gifted man of God and use their gifts for the making of money or creating of an empire, and move subtly away from the purity of the gospel? I've heard it said many times that if Jesus was the leader of your church, nobody would go. But he wasn't interested in making people feel good, wasn't interested in topical, practical things that were going to make your finances and your family better. He was relentlessly pursuing the idea of our intimacy with God and our spiritual maturity, and taking up our cross and taking the narrow way. So these tripwires we have that cause us to respond with either sociological violence or accusations we can't prove that there's something invisible under the waterline, something personal and human that we are not willing to have addressed, let alone address for ourselves. I hesitate to tell this story, as it will be the end of this message. In the season of my life when I was working in churches, I had worked for 2 or 3, and was still thinking that it was possible for me to pursue the God-given convictions upon me in a good conscience and place myself under the yoke of structured denominational policies. I interviewed for a position working with youth in a church in the East Bay. Like so many places, it was a very isolated pocket of people that didn't live in the neighborhood, but their families were born there, so they continued to truck it in there. Very tiny, very small, beautiful place. And trying to read and pray about their neighborhood and about their needs, I was convicted about this church being very insular and very separate from their community, and doing things that made sense to them and didn't really, we think that this neighborhood around us should want to come and do the things the way we do them, despite the fact that we're old white people and they're young, multi-generational Latino families. Like the idea that we could want to bend and alter our preferences for how we do things was not even on the radar. So I, as part of my process of learning about them and learning about me, I gave a message that was about trying to be what this community needed. And invariably, when I give messages like that and I perceive to be a threat to the most, I don't want to say conservative because I am conservative, the most reactionary parts of the church, inevitably, an older man with a stern demeanor who sees himself as protector of the church's traditions will corner me and rebuke me. And I spoke about some demographics that the church is not thrilled with addressing or trying to help or befriend. And he said, yeah, I think you said that sin is okay. I think that you said, that these behaviors that these people do must be okay. And I knew in that minute I'd hit a tripwire. I hit something that was underneath the water level that he couldn't even address, because when I started saying things like, we're being too insular, you're not addressing the needs of your community, and you're not being what they need, you're not being Christ to them, what they heard was, danger, circle the wagons, somebody go rebuke this guy. Because it frightens us that someone would say that we're insular, Caucasian, and unwilling to become the church our neighborhood needs. So that is the first aspect of the list of things that you could describe as being parts of the cultural unconscious of churches. So I pray that you would, if somebody offends you when they make observations about your church and make you feel threatened, consider if the offense, if you are capable of being this analytical in this moment, if it is biblical, or if it is something in your own unconscious feelings about how church should be. We know that when Cain was getting ready to kill his brother, God said, doest thou right to be angry? Are you angry for the right reasons? You know, the sin is at the door. It is going to come and get you if you let it. So, the next time you are angered by boundaries being pushed about your church's culture, and about whether or not it is effectively reaching its community, whether or not it is being a good testimony or not, doest thou right to be angry? Are you responding for the proper reason of, we're doing the most biblical possible thing, and we are clear in our conscience before God about how we're supposed to be reflecting Jesus to our community, how we're supposed to preach the gospel, how we're supposed to serve our neighbors, how we're supposed to develop relationship and testimony? Or is it true that we've slipped into our cultural preference and made that a barrier to the gospel? Please think, please pray. If I have blessed you, encouraged you, equipped you in any fashion, please bless me by liking and subscribing. Thank you.